There is a moment most people experience at least once in their life. You are sitting somewhere completely ordinary, maybe in your car, maybe in your kitchen at 2 in the morning, and something shifts. Not dramatically, not with any kind of announcement, but something inside you looks at the life you have been living and says, "This is not it." That moment is the beginning of self-transformation, and what happens after it is one of the most psychologically complex things a human being can go through. Because here is the thing, wanting to change is easy. Actually changing is something else entirely. And the reason most people fail at it has nothing to do with discipline or effort. It has to do with how deeply your sense of self is wired into your brain. Let us talk about why. The first thing you need to understand is that your identity is not just a concept, it is a neurological structure. Your brain has spent years, possibly decades, building neural pathways around who you are. Every belief you hold about yourself, every pattern of behavior you repeat, every automatic response you have to stress or conflict or success, all of it is physically encoded in your brain. This is neuroplasticity. The brain reshapes itself based on repeated experience. And the version of you that exists right now is the version your brain has spent the longest time reinforcing. So when you decide you want to become someone different, you are not just making a choice. You are asking your brain to dismantle structures it spent years building, and your brain does not do that quietly. But before we get into what happens when you try to change, it is worth understanding what actually triggers that shift in the first place, because it is rarely what people think it is. Most people assume transformation starts with inspiration, a book that changed their life, a conversation that woke something up, but the actual trigger is almost always something quieter. It is a moment of accumulated honesty. You have been carrying something for a long time, a version of your life that looked fine from the outside. Maybe it even felt fine most of the time, but there was a gap, a persistent gap between the life you were living and the life you actually wanted. And for years, you filled that gap with reasons. You told yourself it was not that bad. You told yourself other people had it worse. And then one day, you stopped believing those reasons, not all at once, but enough. Enough that the gap suddenly felt unbearable. That is the real trigger. Not inspiration, exhaustion with the lie. The first thing that happens after that is resistance. And this resistance is not weakness, it is biology. When your brain detects that your behavior is starting to deviate from your established identity, it registers that deviation as a threat. The amygdala, the same structure that processes fear, activates. It sends a signal that something is wrong, something is off. Get back to what is familiar. This is why transformation feels so uncomfortable, not because the new behavior is actually dangerous, but because your nervous system cannot tell the difference between real danger and a change in who you are. To your brain, they feel identical. And this is also why willpower alone almost never works. You can push through the discomfort for a while, but you are fighting a system that has been operating for decades. Eventually, the pull back to your old patterns is stronger than your conscious intention to change. There is another force that makes this even harder, and it is the people around you. Your environment is not neutral. The people you spend the most time with have a powerful psychological effect on your sense of identity. They reflect you back to yourself constantly. They treat you in ways that confirm who they believe you are. And over time, those reflections become part of how you see yourself. So when you start to change, the people closest to you often resist it. Not because they want you to fail, but because your change disrupts their understanding of who you are. If you have always been the people pleaser, and suddenly you start saying no, that feels threatening to them. Some of them will say, "You are acting different." Some will not say anything at all, but you will feel it. A subtle pressure to go back, to be the version of yourself they are comfortable with. This is one of the reasons transformation is so lonely. You are not just fighting your own brain. You are navigating a social environment that was built around the old version of you. And until you find people who support the new direction, the pull backward is coming from every side. So if willpower does not work, what does? The answer is identity shift. And it is a very specific psychological process. Most people try to change their behavior first and hope the identity follows. They say things like, I am going to start working out. I am going to stop drinking. I am going to become more disciplined. They focus entirely on the action. But psychologists have found that lasting change works in the opposite direction. You do not change your behavior to become a new person. You become a new person first, and the behavior follows. This sounds abstract, but it is grounded in very concrete psychology. When you act in alignment with a new identity, even in small ways, your brain begins to register that identity as real. Every time you do something that reflects who you want to be, you are laying down a new neural pathway, and every time you repeat that action, that pathway gets stronger. The psychologist Albert Bandura called this self-efficacy, the belief that you are capable of performing a specific behavior. And his research showed that self-efficacy does not come from thinking about doing something. It comes from actually doing it, even imperfectly, even when it does not feel natural yet. This is where most transformation advice goes wrong. It tells people to wait until they feel ready, to wait until they believe in themselves. But the belief comes after the action, not before it. There is another layer to this that most people do not talk about, and it has to do with grief. When you change who you are not just building something new, you are letting go of something old. And that old version of yourself, the one who was familiar, the one who had certain habits and certain ways of seeing the world, that version felt safe. It felt like home. Letting go of it is a form of loss. And the brain responds to it the way it responds to any loss. With resistance, with sadness, sometimes with anger. This is why transformation so often involves a period where everything feels worse before it feels better. It is not because you are failing, it is because you are grieving the person you used to be. Psychology has a term for this. It is called the death of the ego. Not literal death, but the dissolution of a self that no longer serves you. And it is one of the most psychologically painful things a person can go through, precisely because it feels like losing yourself. And in the middle of that process, there is a stage that almost nobody warns you about, the in-between. You are no longer fully the person you were. The old patterns do not fit the same way anymore. They feel hollow. You can see through them now in a way you could not before. But you are not yet the person you are becoming either. The new identity does not feel solid. It does not feel like yours yet. It feels borrowed, fragile, like something you are trying on rather than something you actually are. This stage is incredibly disorienting. You have lost the comfort of the old self, but you have not yet gained the stability of the new one. You are standing in an empty space between two versions of yourself, and there is nothing to hold on to. This is where most people give up, not because they do not want to change anymore, but because the uncertainty is unbearable. The old self at least felt certain. And certainty, even painful certainty, is something the brain will always prefer to not knowing who you are. The people who make it through this stage are not the ones who feel the least afraid. They are the ones who keep moving despite the fear. They act before the belief catches up. They do the thing they want to become before they fully feel like that person. But there is one more thing that happens in this stage that makes it even harder, and it is self-sabotage. When you are in the process of becoming someone new, a part of your brain is still invested in the old version, not maliciously, but protectively. That old self kept you alive. It got you through things. And a part of your psyche does not want to let that go, because letting it go feels like erasing the evidence that you survived. So that part of you starts working against the transformation in subtle ways. You might find yourself making decisions that contradict everything you said you wanted. You might blow up a situation that was actually going well. You might suddenly feel the urge to go back to an old habit, not because you miss it, but because it feels familiar. Because familiar feels safe. This is not a character flaw. It is a psychological protection mechanism. The part of you that learned to survive is afraid that if you change too much, you will lose the ability to survive at all. It does not understand that you are not erasing your past. You are building on top of it. And here is what happens in the brain when you do that consistently. Every repeated action that reflects the new identity strengthens the neural pathway associated with it. Over time, those new pathways become faster and stronger than the old ones. The behavior that once felt forced starts to feel natural. The identity that once felt like a costume starts to feel like skin. This process does not happen overnight. Research suggests meaningful neural rewiring takes weeks to months of consistent repetition, not days, not one transformative moment. Sustained, repeated action over time. But the direction matters more than the speed. Because every single time you act in alignment with who you want to become, you are voting for that version of yourself. And eventually, that version wins. There is one more thing that accelerates this process, and it is emotion. Neuroscience has shown that emotional experiences embed faster and deeper in the brain than neutral ones. When you pair a new behavior with a strong positive emotion, the neural pathway forms more quickly. This is why experiences that matter to you, things that carry genuine meaning or excitement or purpose, create change faster than routine repetition alone. This is not about hacking your brain with tricks. It is about understanding that transformation is not a purely logical process. It is an emotional one. The reason you change is not because you reasoned your way into a new identity. It is because something in your life made the new version feel worth becoming. And as the new identity takes hold, something else starts to shift. Your relationships begin to change, sometimes dramatically. The people who are comfortable with the old version of you may start to pull away, not because they do not care about you, but because the dynamic they relied on no longer exists. If you were the one who always gave and never asked, and now you are asking, that changes everything for them. Some people will leave, and that will hurt, even when you understand why, because those relationships were part of who you were. Losing them is another layer of the grief that comes with transformation. But other people will show up, people who see the new version and recognize something in it, people who can meet you where you actually are instead of where you used to be. The relationships you build in this new identity are different. They are built on something more honest, and because of that, they tend to feel more solid, more like something you chose instead of something you fell into. And that is the part nobody tells you about self-transformation. It is not really about discipline. It is not about motivation. It is about finding something that matters enough to you that you are willing to feel uncomfortable, willing to grieve the person you were, willing to stand in the empty space between who you were and who you are becoming, and willing to keep going even when your brain is screaming at you to stop. The people who transform are not the ones with the most willpower. They are the ones for whom staying the same became more painful than changing. And if you are at that point right now, if you are sitting in that ordinary moment where something inside you has already said, this is not it, then you are not at the beginning of something difficult. You are at the beginning of something your brain is already capable of doing. It just needs you to start. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.